welcome to the Anonymous Andrew podcast. Life and the choices we make, the choices other people make. This podcast explores all things as they relate to dating and romantic relationships. Why we ignore, or choose to ignore, or miss the red flags. Red flags like gaslighting, cheating, lying, narcissistic behavior, deception, and so much more. Join me each week as we continue my journey into the modern dating world with my weekend rants, anonymous guest dating stories, and experts who share their wisdom so we can better navigate the dating terrain. If you are new to the show or have been with me from the beginning, hold on tight for the Anonymous Andrew experience. Greetings and welcome to another episode of Anonymous Andrew Podcast. Life and the choices we make. Okay, I am just going to say it right up front. You are going to hear in this episode probably one of the most vulnerable and honest sides of my story. I have a gentleman on by the name of Michael Ostrolenk. And he is a licensed certified therapist, psychologist. He's got quite a long resume. And I didn't know while I was recording this episode about 2 months ago how deeply I was impacted by this particular interview. It's Sunday morning, and I am sitting home editing this episode. And of course, I listen to all the episodes as I'm editing them for obvious reasons, background noise and editing, anything that I need to change, fix, mix in, etc. Wow. I got triggered. I got anxious. I was filled with fear. All sorts of emotions flow through me as I listened to this episode this morning. And I when I recorded it didn't had that effect on me. And it's 2 months later. So what I'm getting at here is I didn't know how deep folks, it's almost 18 months now since the breakup. And I have been on a dozen and a half dates, and I have had great moments of times where I thought that I was free from her, free to move on, cleanse of this. As a matter of fact, there was several episodes that I decreed. I said, I am free and I'm ready to move forward. And as I listened to this episode, I realized maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not. I'm not saying that I have a torch for her. I am just saying how much I have been affected by this relationship, how she treated me, how it ended, the things that were done, and you'll hear them explained in detail in the episode. And Michael takes me down a road that no other therapist has done. And all I can say is, wow, it's blowing me away, how deep the post-traumatic stress goes from this past relationship. You might even be able to hear it in my voice. I don't have this excited voice where I'm all happy about, like, hey, welcome to the Anonymous Andrew Podcast, because I'm deeply affected by what I just listened to. This episode is also a little lengthy. It goes a little over an hour, and I usually try to keep them down to 45 minutes. And I apologize for the length of this, but I think if you hang in there, you'll really get a deep understanding of how the message that I'm trying to get out there about choosing wisely. If you are anywhere in a similar situation of post-breakup, heartbreak, etc., you will definitely get something from this episode. I'd like to say, please enjoy this episode, but I don't think enjoy was the right word. But I'm going to shut up and let you listen. We'll talk on the other side. Greetings and welcome to another episode of Anonymous Andrew Podcast, Life and the Choices We Make. And I am honored to have my guest tonight is Michael Ostrolenk. I hope I pronounced that right, Mike. Okay.
You're very close. Ostrolenk.
Okay. Ostrolenk. Okay. And we practiced that before we recorded.
I'll get it.
Mike is a licensed psychotherapist and a resilience coach. And I'm going to leave it there. But if I really had time and I could read the rest of his curriculum, it is unbelievable. I just have to tell you that it's a very impressive resume. Let's just call it that. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the invite. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, licensed as a marriage and family therapist out of the state of California. My specialization in graduate school, which was like almost 30 years ago, was transpersonal psychology, which I'll explain in a moment. And then I did postgraduate work in somatic or body psychology. And both of those schools of psychology play an instrumental role in how I work with couples as well as individuals. So that's like professionally what I've been doing for the last almost 30 years is either working with couples or individuals on the resilience, because you said I'm a resilience coach. So I have a whole program that I work with individuals that help them physiologically, psychologically, environmentally, and socially to kind of go from surviving to thriving. I have a very particular way I work with couples. And a colleague of mine and I just launched a men's group called Resilience Optimized, which will be of interest to you because it's about rethinking, reimagining resilience. He happens to be a former Army Ranger. So a lot of people think, oh, resilience, like gung ho and carry heavy things long distances. There's going to be a physical component to it because that's kind of fun. But what we actually find is necessary, and this speaks to what we'll be talking about today. Resilience, broadly speaking, is the ability for people to sit inside their own experience emotionally, mentally, spiritually, as well as interpersonally. And it's a capacity that a lot of people do not have, especially men. It's a capacity a lot of people would benefit from having because it would help them sit in the chaos that is life, sit in the chaos which happens to happen sometimes inside our own physical being, and allows us to learn how to be with other people, especially our partners, when they're having a really tough time too. So resilience is that part of one of the things that I do. But I can explain transpersonal, I can explain somatics if you'd like me to go down that path.
Yeah, keep talking because I'd like what really stood out was your somatic you studied somatic psychology. Explain a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So for my graduate work, I had to study all the conventional schools of psychology, especially for examination 30 years ago. Somatic psychology is recognizing the body as a first-person experience. We actually live inside our own bodies. A lot of psychology is just between the ears. It's how I think about things. Occasionally, you might how you feel, but it's mostly how I think about things. I would suggest, especially through my training, my experience, my background, that we actually are embodied beings. How we experience the world is not just our thoughts, although they're very important, but energetics of the body, emotions of the body, our posture, our muscle tone, our organ systems, all play a role of how we organize ourselves in life, in relationship to other people, in relationship to our own experience. For instance, the most easiest way to understand this is breath. You're anxious, I can teach you a breathing technique to learn to teach you to relax your system. So you can go from sympathetically activated to parasympathetically activated. So you're more calm, you're more cool, you're more centered, which means you have more access to the prefrontal cortex. You can think more clearly just by changing your breathing pattern. That's just one example of a somatic intervention that I might do with a client to teach them how to self-regulate. So it's not just changing the thinking, which is important, but changing one's physiology, in this case, through the breath. So that's just one example of a somatic approach to psychology.
Okay. So I'm sitting at work and I my boss walks in, and this is an actual example.
Okay.
And I have a boss who is a micromanager and a control freak, and he's 84 years old, but he's all there. And uh, he, I live with bipolar disorder, so I can I can recognize another person with bipolar. So one day he's all happy and smiles and jokingly, and the very next day he can come in, and you can tell by his body language alone that you better just run because he'll find a target on your back, and then he'll anyway. When I see something like that, and this morning he came in and he looked at me and he had a piece of paper in his hand, and my body tensed up, and I said, here it comes. I've been working there for 25 years. I know this guy. So I knew something. I knew the floodgates were about to open. Is that what you're talking about? How I could?
So I can, if you don't mind using
Sure.
that example, I can walk through a process that I might work with you if you're my client. Right? So that reactive state that you found yourself in makes sense because there's a perceived or real threat in your environment. I mean, it's not necessarily a physical threat, but kind of an emotional, mental threat, and you have a bodily reaction to that. It makes complete sense. No
Yeah.
judgment. It's just what we do.
Anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Stress.
yeah. So, if I was working with you, I'd want to help you unpack how that shows up inside your system. So, like, if you say I'm stressed when he walks in the room because I feel his energy, it's kind of what I heard you say. Like, you can
Yeah.
look at him and you're like, oh, he's in one of those headspaces. I had
Mm-hmm.
this reaction. So I'd want to know from you as much detail as possible. What is this reaction? Like, what happens to your breath? What happens to your muscles? What's the thinking pattern that emerges? Like, literally, how you organize yourself against the perceived threat of this guy walking into your space. So, if you're okay with that, just give me.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Mike, one thing that and my audience knows this, and everybody knows this, is I don't hold back anything.
Okay,
So,
cool.
some of my physiological reactions to stress, the flight, fight, or freeze, is tensing up, TMG, like I will start grinding the teeth. Yep, TMJ, right? And I so the audience can't see this, but I'll clench my fist and I put my thumbs and my fingers. So it's not like I'm ready to fight, but it looks like fist, but it's like I'm tensed up.
Yeah.
And then the body gets tensed up, and I literally, the posture, it's a defensive posture.
So that's perfect. And I would imagine because of this tensing that you do, that you literally can physically see what you're doing, that you contract here in your chest and you restrict your breathing. Would that be an accurate assessment? What I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I do know a little bit about meditation. I do meditate. I know how the breathing thing does. But when you're in the moment and you see that let's say the hurricane or tornado called boss coming at you, sometimes the mind, I don't have enough awareness to say, okay, breathe. So I'm sorry, continue. So
no. So my guess is correct that there's a contraction of the breath as well for you.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is when we contract our breath, it's an attempt not to feel certain things. Because if you breathe fully, you feel fully. If you contract your breath, you're feeling less. So it's a defense mechanism, which makes sense. You're also protecting your heart, right? So you contract, you have the tension in your chest, you're contracting your breath. I would imagine that there's a script in your mind that comes up all the time. Yeah. There might be imagery, there might be a smell, you might hear voices. I don't mean schizophrenically hearing voices, but like there might be a voice in your head, like whatever the voice is around the script, with the tone, with the volume. So there's a whole gestalt of how you organize yourself mentally, emotionally, physiologically, energetically to a perceived threat, this guy. So what I would work with you on is how to be fully aware of that when it's happening. Cool. Then how do we start slowly deconstructing that? So you go from reactive, like this is my reaction, oh shoot, to responsive, meaning I can choose how I want to respond to this real perceived threat, as opposed to I'm triggered. This is how I learned as a kid to react to threats, and I do whatever I do. So multiple different things I would do with you if you're my client. So, for instance, you perfectly showed like you did this, like I tighten up, right? that is an unconscious process you learn to do to protect yourself. What I would recommend you do is take conscious control of it and do it even more. So you actually choose to be the contractor. I mean, you're always choosing to be the contractor unconsciously, but you're consciously contracting even more than you would under normal circumstances. Because once you consciously take control and start doing it even more, you start breaking the spell that's in your nervous system, like this I have to do. And it starts relaxing your system. And you pointed out here, for instance, the TMJ, the tightness
Yep.
of the, like, so you could, like, what you could notice what muscles get contracted, you contract them even more. Maybe you start noticing that the tightness in your jaw keeps your mouth shut. Why? Because you probably don't want to say something stupid and get yourself fired, right? No. So, like, okay, what if you actually learn to relax the jaw and open it up a little bit? So you contract the muscles, you take control of the nervous system, relax the system. As you begin to contract even more and relax, you open your chest a little bit so you can start breathing more fully. You start breathing more fully. Like I said earlier, you gain control, you gain access to the prefrontal cortex, so you can think more clearly, so you're less reactive. So just by doing those few things, you're starting to move from reaction to response. You're choosing how you want to respond. You're relaxing the system. You're breathing fully, relaxing the muscles, whatever script is going on, be aware of it. I would work with you to talk about it, because my guess is that script comes from various events in your life 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, depending on your age. Right? We can track it back, like where you learn how to think about these things this particular way.
Or working with him for 25 years and knowing how I
Yeah.
know what's coming. So it's
Yeah.
just, it's not just prior to that. It's, I know what this man is going to say
Yeah.
or come
So
at me with.
then you can play around with the script in your head. And then, so as you relax the physical body, relax the energetics of the system, start shifting the scripting a little bit so it's not so negative. And there might be other things that come up, like you might share with me, like I have these visions, or I hear certain things, or smells, and we'd work through all these various things. I'm trying to do like hours of sessions within 2 minutes. But so we start deconstructing this. We go from reactive to responsive. You start changing the scripts in your mind. And then I might suggest, and I'd want to know more because I don't know your relationship to him and I don't know enough about you. So this is a broad generalization, not specific to you in this case. But I'd suggest to you to be curious about the situation you find yourself in. Because I would wonder, okay, how often do you find yourself in these types of situations? We talked offline earlier about some of the women choices you make, right?
Mhm.
And it seems what you shared, and you share this online, so it's not a secret. Like
Nope.
you attract the same type of females.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, okay, do you also attract similar type of people in the boss sense too? I'd be curious about that. Like, what is it about that you would attract this particular person in your life? What is if you want to look at a lesson, what lesson do I need to learn in this? Just like I would say, you said, hey, I keep attracting the same females that I'm dating. That's interesting. What about you showing up in a particular way that attracts these type of females? What's a lesson you need to learn? How do you need to show up differently so you stop attracting this? And I'm not saying like if you completely shift yourself that he's not going to do what he does, because it sounds like he has some mental challenges and that's just who he is. And yet, possibly, if you show up differently, maybe he might show up differently. Even if he doesn't, if you show up differently, you're showing up differently. You're no longer reactive, you're responsive. And maybe you're a little bit curious and maybe you start engaging him a little bit different. Maybe. I don't know. Like I said,
Yeah.
I don't want to put too much on too
Yeah.
minute conversation of 20 years of relationship with this guy.
Well, I like that where you brought in the relationships, because I do seem to attract negative energy. So whether it's romantic, whether it's employment, I might not throw friendship in there because I do have a great group of friends, a
Nice.
support network, of
Good.
course my 12-step program and all that. But I I I draw in negative energy. I see, and through this podcast and many other guests, and it is it because that I'm putting out that energy. So the boss walks in and I see his expression, so I immediately put out my negative energy. So he's reading right off of that. So he sees me tense up. So he thinks that I'm ready to go at it. And by the way, we ended up going at it because
Okay.
I had it.
Got it.
I've kept my mouth shut for. I run his IT department, and
Okay.
he's 84 years old and IT phobic. He just doesn't believe in computers. He thinks the world is doomed with computers, and uh, he doesn't understand how certain things work. So actually, the thing he came in with this morning was just something that he didn't understand, but he tried to make it my fault because look, you get the
Once,
idea.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I got defensive. Like, oh, here we go again. This I got to be kind because I don't. Nobody at work knows I have a podcast, but God forbid they hear it.
Yeah.
This old man that's going to come in and come at me with another dumb question, but he doesn't sit down and ask me, hey, can you explain this to me? And I hold up the book and or the paper and say, why does this? I run the e-commerce site. Why
Okay.
does the inventory say this and not this? And how can we fix it? Sometimes he'll do that, but there are days that I don't know what happens on his way to work where a switch flips in his head. And like I said, it could be me, it could be anybody in the company. You walk in, the first person he sees, he puts a target on their back. So it's a little bit of a mental thing with him. Back to the negative energy. So yeah, let's get off the boss thing for a bit.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. If that's okay. The negative energy thing,
Sure.
and
Go ahead.
yeah, even a little bit to the boss thing too. And if someone has a mental illness, take what I'm about to say lightly because it's a whole different dynamic, right? But um, I'd be curious for you, for him. Like, ooh, he doesn't like technology, doesn't see the values in computers. Maybe he's watched the Terminator movie too much. He's waiting for
Yeah.
Skynet to come, whatever. But I'll be like, that's really, his generation, his age kind of makes sense, maybe.
It does.
And could there's so maybe is there empathy or compassion you can have for why he believes what he believes, not taking it so personally because it's about him and his generation and how he sees the world, not about you and what you offer. Maybe, like, I'm just kind of curious, is that a possibility for you, for him?
I there are many times when I try to take that approach that he just doesn't understand. The reason he brought me on board 25 years ago was that he was using, before Windows and Microsoft, there was uh I don't even remember the language. It was even before Unix, where you had dummy terminals in one server and everything was yellow or green on the screen, and he built that system with some software engineer. I'm going back to 1980.
Okay,
And that system worked flawlessly for him.
nice.
But in 2000, we got a contract with the New York City, one of the agencies, and they required us to upgrade. And then over the next 10 years, of course, e-commerce came along and uh, all the technology, emails and Zoom and video conferencing and all that. He doesn't understand any of that. And even to the point where your personal cell phone now is part of your job, because I have my cybersecurity team. I can text real quickly and say, hey, I think I got a virus. But he'll walk in and see my cell phone in my hand and think I'm texting a woman.
Okay, right.
And he's got a good reason to believe that, because 10 years ago I was.
Okay.
you know
I think so. Okay,
but
all right.
but that was 10 years ago when we didn't really use personal cell phones for business. But now today, most people,
Yeah.
you have your personal cell phone, but you use it for work, right?
Mhm.
I think that you can argue that, especially the generation today and post-COVID, everybody's working from home, you're using your cell phone.
Right,
But
right.
he doesn't see it that way. You see where I'm going? So I don't know how to
Yeah.
get into his mind that this is the way the movement is going that way. So I
Yeah,
don't
not
know
the
if
same.
I don't know if I can convince him.
Yeah, and I don't know his mental state. I don't know enough about him, so I wouldn't want to really
Well,
comment on that. But
yeah, I'll tell you this: he's a brilliant man. He grew up in Brooklyn, didn't go to high school. Came from a poor family, and now he is in the multi millionaire status. He
yeah,
owns several companies, and he owns. He's a
nice.
landlord, commercial real estate, done very well for himself. So he's not dumb,
Yeah.
but um, personally, I think he should just retire and go off. But he's one of those workaholics that come in at 6 in the morning, stay at 6 at night, and work on weekends. So, anyway, we're getting off
Well,
on a tangent.
yeah,
But
let's talk about the negative things. You know, if you and I were working together, I would go down a couple different paths with you, but one of them, I'd be curious, what is your secondary benefit of attracting the negativity in your life? Assuming that's true, assuming that there's a benefit you get from this interaction, this type of interaction, whether you think you do or don't, just assume you do. What might it be? Let's talk about that.
oh boy, there's a whole bunch I could fill in the blanks there. I well let's go to the romantic side. If I have a particular, and I think many men might say this, and some people may call it shallow, but I have a particular type of female that I like, right? So if I'm swiping or meeting somebody, or I'm in the supermarket or wherever, Target, and I see a woman that I find physically attractive, I, I look at them first. And I think studies have shown that men are visual and they see that first, right? And so let's just take this last woman, for example. When I met her and saw how beautiful she was, I threw all of my logic and rationale out the window. So everything, because I saw beauty and I said, I want this woman in my life. And that's why this podcast at the beginning, you hear me talk about the red flag. I missed all of the red flags. So I attracted this negative woman because she was full of negativity. We sat on my couch for months. She talked about being raped at 16, that she was kidnapped at 17. She was living in South America, uh, in the country that we talked about. And she had a lot of trauma growing up, and her mother abandoned her, and her father was cheating on them. And I sat here and listened to all of this. So I think they call that trauma bonding, right? So right off the bat, there's all that negativity coming into my life. And all I could think of, the Superman complex kicked in, and I said, oh, I want to fix this woman and make her feel safe, that if she's with me, none of that's going to happen. You're going to be safe with me. But that's not smart. It's and I've done that with several women, and it turns out in the end, it doesn't turn out in the end. It ends.
Yeah, so that's a role you play as a savior. You mentioned the word Superman, or fix her, or what,
Yeah,
the knight in white armor and stuff like that. So that's so the negativity serves you to allow you to step up and play that particular role.
right,
That's what you seem to like to do, based on the history you just shared with me, right?
right.
Okay,
But I got,
so
but it doesn't
please.
work anymore. It's not
Well,
working, and
yeah, no, I understand. But I mean, you said it's not working now. Has it ever worked, really?
no, no,
Okay. Okay. So I'd be
no, because
curious to.
I haven't had a relationship other than my marriage longer than 7 years. So
Okay.
it's 6 months, 18 months, 1, 2, whatever. I get it explodes 18 months, 2 months in, and then I start, and I never stopped. I just jumped right to the next woman. Got right back on a dating app, and I started. And I told you before before we recorded, that this is the first time I stopped. I stopped running after women, and so we were going to talk about sitting in our own skin.
Yeah.
I decided to be single, not get into a relationship, and learn to be in my own skin.
Which is great. And I would say there's two ways I would work with you on that. One is I'd be curious, like, okay, now that you've sat in your own skin for X period of time, how are you showing up for yourself and in your relationship differently than you would have been 18 months ago or 2 years ago? Like, how are you different? Was one of my first questions.
Okay. I was deathly afraid to go out and do anything by myself. So last summer, I'm a beach person, and every summer with this woman and the previous woman and the previous woman, we were beach people, and every weekend we would go to the beach and spend time at the beach, or we would go on a boat or whatever. We were like, I live by the ocean.
Okay.
When I didn't have her in my life anymore, and I told the audience all last summer, they probably got tired of it. Oh, it's another beautiful weekend. It's going to be 90 degrees this weekend, and I want to go to the beach, but I have no one to go with. A lot of my friends either live too far away or they're not beach people, and I wouldn't go down to the beach by myself. And it took 5 people to convince me to get on my bike. I'm a bicyclist, and get on my
Uh-huh.
bike and go down to the beach and put a lounge chair out or a blanket and read a book. And there's nothing wrong with that, but in my mind there was something wrong with that. People are going to look at me and go, what's this guy doing on the beach alone? I think that it was a learned
Mhm.
I, something, right? I must have over the years thought that I need someone to be next to me. So to answer your question, I gotten over that. I finally went down to the beach. I started going alone. I started riding the boardwalk on my bike. I would go out to dinner. I would go to the movies by myself. I started doing the things alone.
Okay, good.
And you know what? It wasn't so bad.
Yep, you survived.
I survived.
Yeah. How else might you be showing up differently, including for yourself now? That's great. I can go to the beach. I can go to movies. I can go to dinner. What else are you doing and how you show up for yourself that's different than 18 months ago?
Taking care of my physical body. I was a mess coming into sobriety. I was overweight. I had all sorts of medical issues. Today, I can proudly say that I just had some blood results done and some checkups, and the doctors are shocked that I've turned everything around. I I could show you the the medicine bottles that I was on for the last 5 years. Now I'm down to just two that I need to take. Um, so I was able to get off the meds by eating healthy, exercising, meditating,
Good.
being active.
So, I mentioned that I have a program that I meant part of my resilience work, besides running a men's group, I also have the program called the Emergent Human. And I work on the physiological, psychological, social, and environmental sides of things to help people go from surviving to thriving. Physiologically, I love to hear I'm exercising. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Eating well, very cool. So I'd be curious too, like, how are you sleeping?
That's the one thing I haven't been able to tackle. So while I live with bipolar disorder, I'm asymptomatic. I can get through the day without any uh, mood swings or mania or depression. But putting my head down on that pillow at night, even though I've had a 17-hour day and I'm physically and mentally exhausted, the head hits the pillow and out comes the tape recorder.
Yeah.
What
Okay.
have I got to do tomorrow, or what could I have done better in that relationship? And it just goes on and on and on and on. So I'm trying to meditate. I do take a sedative to go to sleep. Where my therapist would like to get me off the sedative, so I'm open to.
Well, I'm not going to practice medicine on this call, but I might suggest to have a conversation with like a functional medicine doctor, nutritionist, because there are perhaps nutritional interventions that might prove helpful to calm the system down. As I love the meditation, that's awesome. There are some like binaural beats people can use too, which train the brain and put you in a particular state, can relax the system. And there might be some nutritional protocols. Like I'm a Huberman fan. He's a podcaster. He's a professor actually at Stanford, but he has this whole protocol for sleep. Like, and I don't know what medication you're on, so I would never suggest you try something without talking to your doctor.
Right.
Or make sure everything is okay. But perhaps besides the I manage myself through my breath. I use binaural beats, get my system in a particular state. Maybe there's certain nutritional protocols, supplementation, that might be useful to calm the system down to help you sleep. Because exercise is great, eating well is great, sleep is like that would be my number one thing for
Yeah.
every human being. Because if we are not sleeping well, we're not eating well, we're not exercising, we're not dealing with our stress well, are and are kind of in a sympathetic, activated state most of the time, it's hard for us to make the psychological changes we need. And if you're in a relationship and the person is showing up a particular way that triggers you, and we talked about the
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
anxious avoidance style. We can talk about that a little bit more. Like if you're already kind of in an anxious state because of lack of sleep, lack of exercise, lack of movement practices, lack of good food, and then you're in a relationship, it's just magnified 1,000 times, which makes making decisions that much more challenging.
Yeah.
That's why for me, it's like let's dial in your physiology as much as we can, including day-night cycles, like as best as possible. I always have my clients do this, a Huberman thing. Hey, can you wake up with the sun, spend some time outside as the sun rises? Can you be at night as the sun sets? Because you're setting the circadian biology of your own system based on
Right.
the cycles, which is so important. And then we look at exogenous chemicals, like when I'm not saying you, but like when you take your caffeine, a lot of people like drink coffee all day long. They wonder why they can't sleep at night. Some people start coffee too soon. Like I think there's a 90-minute window from what I remember, from like the time you wake up, the time you should, if you're going to have consume coffee for it to have its best effect on you. So like, you can cycle things in exogenous chemicals. Do you drink alcohol? I know you don't. Congratulations on being sober. Alcohol's, if you want to mess up your sleep, drink alcohol.
Drink alcohol. Oh, I found that out.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Like I'll encourage all my clients to like cut your alcohol consumption to zero if you can, and if you can't, cut it to zero anyways. Because like we won't have to go down that path. The consequences.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Or marijuana. A lot of states have legalized marijuana, so people use marijuana for sleeping purposes too, which might knock you out, but has a detrimental effect on deep sleep, from what I understand. So like we just got to be really mindful of what we do and how we do it. Okay, so let's dial in your physiology. And then I love, if you're okay with this, like let's talk about the attachment styles and living in our own skin. Can we jump down that path?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I love like, hey, I'm learning to live in my own skin. My friend Donna calls this like, she would say for me it's Michael land or Michael verse. Like I'm creating my own universe, right? So this would be like Andrew's verse or Andrew's land, right? So I'd want to know from you, what else are you doing to create the life that you want to live, independent of having a partner? Let's keep diving into that. What are you not doing that you want to be doing? Cool. Let's add those in. What are you doing that you want to do more of? What are you doing that you don't want to do anymore? That's not conducive to a thriving life. We kind of go through all those things. And let's just say you're in a relationship and you continue to attract an avoidant personality and you're the anxious style, which is a perfect match. Like you couldn't ask for a better match because you chase and she runs away.
Yeah.
And then she'll come back to you and like, and then, the pattern because we've talked about this before on other shows. I have to imagine. I would want to know from you. Speaking of being in your own skin, what it's like for you to be anxious. Forget the word anxious. Like actually, like describe to me how you feel when there's a female in your life and she does what she does and you're feeling what you call anxious. That's important to me. So if you're cool, we can jump down that path. If you can recall what it feels like, because that's important information we can kind of dive into somatically, and I can explain to you how to work with you if you're interested.
So you're talking about, give you some examples of when I was with her or now?
Well, let's just say for a moment, let's just assume for the moment, just for discussions on your podcast, that you haven't completely cleared up what you might call your anxious anxiety, your anxious attachment style. Let's just say some of it's still there. Maybe you're a little bit more stable. Let's just assume for conversation's sake, some of the anxiety is still there. I would play like Inspector Clouseau. I don't know what you mean. Explain to me what you mean by anxiety or your attachment style. How does it show up? How do you know you're feeling anxious in that relationship, a new one or even previous the old one?
Well, I could tell you what's happening now. I've been feeling very overwhelmed. Um, I have a day job which I need to basically keep the house over my head and pay the bills. And this podcast is not making money. It is a hobby. One day maybe I'll get there, but right now I'm funding the podcast. And so working Monday through Friday, going to some of those 12-step programs at night, trying to see, I have grandkids, trying to see them on the weekends, uh, trying to get I play a lot of tennis, and so all the exercise. So I find myself not organized where I can balance all of that. So there are some nights when I'm in that bed and my head's on that pillow, is like, tomorrow I have work, then I have a podcast interview, then I got to go to an AA meeting, and oh my God, when am I going to get it? I got 5 people I got to call. And thank God for the cell phone, because it has that reminder feature where you could just say, hey, Siri, remind me, that I got to call my son tomorrow, because I will forget, But anyway, to get to your point, is that I get overwhelmed with what tasks that I need to do tomorrow or next week. And I do have a calendar, and I do have an organizer, and I have an artificial, what do you call it, virtual assistant. Um, and they can be helpful, but the brain will override that sometimes and just start throwing at you. Now, in the relationship, I would get anxious when she was coming down, when I knew that there was a possible. There were many nights that she would always come over on the weekends, spend the weekends. And in the beginning, it was lovely and beautiful, and the sex was great. But then after a year, she started coming down, and the audience knows this. She'll say to me, we'd have breakfast, and we would kibitz and watch a movie, and then I would try to warm her up to get into the bedroom, and she'd say, "Oh, we can't have sex today," and I would say, "Why?" And she would just say, I can't. This is where the gaslighting comes in, and I ultimately found out that she was out having sex with somebody the night before. So that became an anxiety for me, because she would be coming down on the weekends, and I wouldn't know whether or not she was going to be mine for that weekend, or she had already given herself to somebody else. And I had the discussion with her multiple times, and she, said, "I'm not seeing anybody else. I'm not cheating on you." Yeah, but I knew she was. So to go for your anxiety, the anxiety was when she was coming down, how was that weekend going to go? Because I knew it could go one way or the other way.
So there are two paths, and I would suggest we do the second path. The first one is overwhelm about life in general. And if we're working together, I'd go down that path with you and help you create strategies to help you deal with the stress a little bit differently. Cool. That aside, but this is about the relationship stuff. So I would add. So you laid out the kind of drama scenario, what happens on the weekends, but I would still want to know. I want to play dumb and say, okay, you say you're anxious. I don't know what that means. Like, how do you know inside your own body what's going on that you call anxious when it comes to anxious attachment style?
I never thought I would say this, but it's been so long. It's almost, a year and a half now. If you had asked me this question a year ago, I could have given you specific examples. I think there were times when either she drove down or I'd go up and pick her up. She only lived 20 minutes away, but sometimes she couldn't get the car. I would pick her up. But I would be anxious because I didn't know how the weekend was going to go. Was she going to come? Because she would literally put me in the friend zone for the weekend, because I have to be, I don't want to be vulgar, but I have to be open and honest. She was having sex with other men. And when she would come down here, her body was off limits because she had too much sex. And so she couldn't have sex with me, but she didn't know how to tell that to me. So it happened often enough that I didn't know which weekends. It didn't happen every weekend. It just happened sporadically. And I didn't know which weekend I was going to get. Just like the boss, I didn't know what day when I go to work, what am I going to get from him? Is he going to come in all happy and jolly, or is he going to come in with that piece of paper in his hand with that look on his face. I didn't know if she was going to come down and be my girlfriend for that weekend, or she was going to come down and just, hey, let's cook, let's go for a drive, let's do this and do anything but go in the bedroom.
If you're okay with this, since it's a memory you don't necessarily have because it was a year and a half ago, let me just make up what
Sure.
you might mean by anxiety, just for educational purposes. This is not specific to you. You haven't said this to me. But let's just say you said, hey, Mike, when we're together and I'm feeling anxious, this is my experience. And you might say, like, there's particular thoughts that go through my mind, and they go through really fast. And you might say there's a volume and a tone to the words I'm hearing in my head. Cool. I notice I hold my breath, and I'm doing chest breathing. So it's not deep, slow abdominal breath. I'm doing chest breathing. And I notice, like, when kind of anxious, I collapse a little bit, and I'm a little tight up here. So ultimately, I'm protecting my heart, but I'm like, I'm not breathing fully. Okay, so there's the chest breathing, a little tightness, let's just say in the jaw. There's a particular script that's going inside your head. So I'd say to you, all right, cool. Very much like we talked at the very beginning of this conversation, I want you to become so enamored by how you do what you do that you know it in great detail. Like when I'm anxious, this is how I embody my anxiety. This is like the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, the energetics. This is the posture. This happens to my muscles. This happens to my organs. Like, just so you're so intimately knowledgeable in your whole system is step one. Because what that does is it provides you very valuable information. Because if you're feeling anxious, you're not feeling safe.
Right.
If you're not feeling safe, you're not feeling safe inside yourself. And there's something possibly the way you describe her sounds like she also contributes to you feeling a lack of safety. It's possible for you not to feel safe, even the person is safe in front of you. But it sounds like she contributed to you not feeling safe. So there's a way like, ooh, I don't feel safe inside my own body. I don't feel safe in this relationship because there's some, things that are going on that are not open and honest and discussed, but I feel it intuitionally or a gut feeling or whatever, however, energetically, I feel something's going on. Like, I know, but she's denying it. So there's lack of safety in the relationship, valuable information, because then you have to decide, what kind of relationship do I want? Am I okay feeling this way in a primary relationship? And the answer is no. Then you have to do a couple of different things. You need to learn how to manage yourself differently, which goes back to deconstructing all these things. Like, okay, I'm tight, I'm contracted, I'm not breathing fully. Well, okay, I'm gonna deconstruct all these things. I'm gonna go from my reactive, anxious state to my responsive, secure state. It takes time. It's not like you can do it immediately. I'll let you do some sacred medicines or something like that. That can help. But like, oh, boom. So you're doing the work. You're finding more safety in your body. You're breathing, you're relaxing the muscles, you're changing the script. So you actually are changing how you organize yourself in life, generally speaking, in relation to this other person. And then in time, you might be like, okay, yes, it is me. I'm feeling much more safe, calm, cool, collected, equanimity. I'm more resilient emotionally. And she's also contributing by the way she shows up to how I feel. Now, it's not causal because we're responsible for our own experiences, but she's contributing to these things. You can ask the question, like, I'm feeling really good in myself. I'm a sovereign human being. Do I want to be in a relationship with a person who shows up that particular way? Now, it's hard to say that when you're anxious, you're not sleeping, you don't feel so good. All the hormones are flowing because it's exciting. She's pretty. Like, you already said how beautiful she was. Like, that's drawing. But if you can get yourself to a calm, cool, centered, equanimity split place, more resilience in your system, you can take better decisions. And part of the decision making is having more clarity of thought on the standards, values, characteristics you want in another human being. Does she possess those things? Can you engage in a conversation? If she can't match where you are, then she's not the right person for you. If she's like, oh, you're showing up differently, I need to show up differently, you guys can work together and grow together, that's awesome. But if you're like, I'm anxious, you're avoidant, I'm no longer anxious, you're still running away, okay, that's cool. Like, I'm not going to judge you. You shared some of her history. Holy moly, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I'm not like saying she's an evil, horrible person. I have compassion for her. I have empathy for what she went through. but she's not necessarily the right person for me.
Oh, and it took me this past year to realize that.
Yeah, no, yeah, yeah. Love is blind, right?
But when she left, I felt as if a part of me left, like literally. So let's go. Just imagine the twin flames concept or the soulmate concept. I felt like part of my soul had been ripped away from me. Um, that was And by the way, during the relationship, there were so many times that my therapist, my friends, my sponsor all came to me because I would go to them with the stories and complaints, and they would just look at me and go, "Why are you putting up with this?
Okay.
Walk away."
Well,
And I
so
couldn't. And I
yeah,
couldn't.
so that's interesting. I would suggest you look at your language because it's not that you couldn't, you chose not to. It would have been
I
fucking
chose
hard as
not to.
shit. Right.
Yeah,
I
you're
mean,
right.
I'm not
You're
saying
right.
it's
You're
easy, but like really be careful with your language. Like I chose not to leave. I had people, my therapist, my sponsor, my friends saying, "What the hell are you in this relationship for?" That's a great effing question. Like,
yeah.
what is it that was serving you in some way that provided you something more important than feeling good? Because if you felt so good about yourself, then you probably wouldn't be in a relationship. But there's something maybe missing inside of you. I don't want to put words in your mouth and like I don't know you well enough. This would take some coaching and therapeutic
Yeah.
interventions conversation.
I
But I'm just general broad
I
question.
and I can answer that question, and it's a very raw and honest answer. She was so beautiful that I thought that I would never find somebody as beautiful as her at my age. She was
Okay.
just 5 years younger than me, but looked 14, 15 years younger than what she really was. And as I get older, and that was several years ago. Now that I'm almost 64, I got to be kind how I say this. I'm looking for a woman who matches th- that I'm physically in shape and I take care of my body. And I look at some of the pictures on these dating apps and they're not taking care of themselves. So, which is what I was afraid of. If I let this woman go, because she was in great shape, by the way, and she ate healthy. If I let this woman go, I'm never going to be able to find somebody as beautiful and as healthy and as vibrant as she was. And that's why I was afraid to let go. Fear
Yeah,
of not finding the same person without all the bad stuff that went along with it.
I understand. Yeah. So some things I might suggest to explore are what other characteristics would you love to see that are primary to you in this other person? Because I heard, okay, she eats healthy, she exercises, she looks beautiful. Cool. Those are great qualities. But like, I also heard some things that were not such great qualities. So like,
No.
what would be like your 5 or 6 highest qualities or characteristics or character traits?
Com- Commitment, honesty. If I ask you a direct question, I get a direct answer. No gaslighting, no lying, no deception, no cheating, no. Because I'm a committed I did not cheat on her, and I have not cheated on any of the girlfriends that I've been with in the past 10 years. Yet I think they have, and I put up with it. Um, for fear of not finding. And yet I did find somebody again, but they did the same thing. So I kept attracting the same woman
Yeah, yeah,
over and over again.
yeah. And that's something we just talked about this offline that I want to explore with you. Like, it's interesting you keep attracting the same woman. What is it about you that attracts this kind of woman? And we would dive into that too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would suggest, like, yeah, okay, you name one characteristic, honesty, and I would look at it 2 different ways. I'd come up with 2 or 3 other characteristics. And beauty is great, exercise is great, healthy is great, eating well. Those are wonderful things. What other characteristics, 3 or 4 or 5, can we put up there that are so important to you that you're not going to give them up? That they're like the most primarily important for you, for another human being to show up for you in your life. And I heard honesty is one of them. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like
Showing up. Um, Showing up and being a partner.
So I would want to know from you what you actually mean by that and what behaviors would indicate to you that she is showing up that particular way is my first question.
She would come over and I would literally be, and before she came over, I knew she was coming down. So I'd run out to the store. Every weekend, she got a bouquet of flowers. And every weekend, I went out and got uh, uh, this Latin cuisine that she likes for breakfast. And I would buy that and I would have it made. In other words, I went crazy for 2 hours making sure that when she got here, everything was perfect. The flowers were there, her breakfast was ready. And
Nice.
I was waiting for her at the door and she'd come in and I would run up and give her a big hug. And when you hug somebody, you expect a hug back.
Mhm.
And what I would get would be the arms would go like this and then they would drop. And I'd be like, where's my hug? And she'd kind of, oh, then I put my bags down. And she was very good. She liked what's the love language when you bring gifts? She always brought me a gift. She would make something very crafty with her hands. So that was her way of saying, I respect you, and I want to. She would make me things and bring me gifts, but that's not what I wanted. My love language is touch and what is it when you intimacy,
Words of affirmation. Words of affirmation.
words of affirmation and hugs and
So that's okay. So here's what I find, and I love the love languages. I just talked about those a couple of days ago. What I find really important for relationships as a marriage and family therapist is open and honest agreements on how we engage one another. Because I find that most people fall into relationships, they don't have an open conversation about what they want, what they expect, how they like to be treated, how wanting to be curious about how the other person wants to be treated. We just show up with our family of origin, our culture, our nationality, ethnicity, all kinds of cultural forms that kind of flow through us and have us unconsciously show up and do things in a relationship. Most of what we do is like that, and a lot of mind reading. Oh, she should or he should know exactly what I'm thinking because he knows me or she knows me well enough.
yeah,
And that does not work. But if I said
no,
to you, or you said to a partner, hey, I would really appreciate if you did this, whatever this is. This really means a lot if you do it this particular way. At least then she's informed and she does it. Cool. If she doesn't do it, that's a conversation. You're not always going to get what you want all the time. You have to
no,
understand that. But she
yeah,
won't know what you want unless you tell her. You won't know what she wants unless she tells you. And it's an ongoing conversation because what you need in the first month of relationship might be different 6 months down the road. You've been married 5 years down
yep,
the road, or 10 years down
yep,
the road. So you constantly have these kind of conversations very honestly, very openly. And if there's lack of agreement, like you said, hey, I'm a really touchy feely kind of guy and I like words of affirmation, and she's completely not like that. Oh, and no judgment, like just not her thing.
no,
And that's really important for you. Like, that's valuable information. Cool. Okay.
yeah,
Then you can take a better decision for yourself. So like I said, I would just suggest what other kind of characteristics that you want to put up really high, and then self-reflect, because it's not just about I need her to do this. I want her to show up these characteristics. Like, how am I with those characteristics? How honest am I? How open am I? How vulnerable am I? Whatever the other characteristics you have. Do I take care of myself? Do I eat well? Do I eat my healthy? All those things you got to self-reflect too, because it's not just about her showing up for you. It's like, how are you showing up for her too? And if, for instance, if you said honesty is really important, cool. And then I got to know you after a while. And I'm like, man, Andrew, you say honesty is important to you. And I don't hear you lying, but I hear you withholding a lot. Because I'll make this
right,
up. So you'll be like, you seem to withhold a lot from your partner because you're afraid of hurting her feelings. Understand? Cool. You're a people pleaser. We talked about that offline. Cool. It's a whole thing. All right. So like maybe honesty is important, but you're not living into that. You're not embodying that principle or
right,
that. We need to look
interesting,
at that. You
yeah,
need to have you in alignment with your own principles, your own values, not just the other person. And then we work on that. Like, okay, how do we have you become more honest, less withholding, less people pleasing, whatever the things are, right?
right,
Yeah.
okay, wow. Like I say to a lot of my guests, where were you a year ago when I needed you? so, so, um, Mike, we got to wrap it up.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
Unbelievable amount of information and resources that you just and things to really that I think that tonight when I put my head on the pillow that I can think about what you just said. Uh, I when I left this relationship, it took me many months to reflect back and say I take ownership of the failure of this relationship because of A, B, and C. Um, I stayed. I knew she was doing this, but I stayed, and I tried to establish boundaries, and she crossed them, and I didn't. There were no repercussions and things like that, and so I take full responsibility for what happened. This podcast is about taking ownership and accountability and trying to help other people identify that, and so it doesn't happen to them as well. And having guests on like you that can help point out all the little nuances that you went through are great. And I will work on that technique where if I tense up, I will work on the physiology because today's only Wednesday. I got 2 more days in the week, but I have to go to work tomorrow. I can only imagine. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about where we can find you online.
Sure.
Any projects you have going on right now?
Thank you. So you can find most of my work at Michael, Michael, the letter D, Ostrolenk, OSTROLENK.com. On my website, you'll see about my work with individuals through the Emergent Human Program, the 4 pillars: physiological, psychological, environmental, and social. You'll see my couples work on there as well. I also do 1 to 3 day retreats with individuals, couples, and small groups, high intensity kind of training. And then a colleague of mine and I, JC Glick, we just launched Resilience Optimized, resilienceoptimized.com. It's a men's group. We're launching here in about 3 weeks. Still have a couple spots left. So that's also a men's group. And I define resilience as not just carrying heavy loads long distances, which is really cool to be physically capable. It's like, how do I sit in the uncomfortable feelings that are inside of me?
Right.
How do I sit with that? How do I sit with the as female friends of mine will say, the messiness of a female partner, like without having to try to fix her or change her and just hold the space for her. So a lot of the stuff we'll be working on with these men too.
That's great. For until I got sober, I dealt with the feelings that I was feeling or the anxiety and all that with alcohol and drugs. And so getting sober, I had to learn how to do all of that. But I did most of that through the 12-step system and through therapy and through meditation and now through this podcast because I've had over 100 guests on that are all people like yourself who are experts in the fields. And Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. I will put everything you just said in the show notes. I think you're also on social media. You're on a couple of platforms.
I am. Yeah. On Instagram, Ostrolenk, Ostrolenk. Same with LinkedIn, Michael Ostrolenk. On Facebook, Michael Ostrolenk as well. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Ostrolenk. And yeah, those 4. Actually, I'm on TikTok, but I don't do TikTok myself for various.
I mean, you know what? I joined TikTok for the podcast, and I don't. Personally, I don't find it doing anything, so I don't know. And not to get political, but the Chinese are spying on us with that thing, so that's another whole story.
Whole other conversation, but someone else does it for me, so I'm actually on there. I don't have it on my phone.
I have some. Yeah, I have a social media producer too that kind of does all my stuff. So, but I will put everything that you just mentioned in the show notes so the audience can contact it. All right, Mike, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Wow. That's all I can say is wow. It's a Sunday morning, and I'm sitting home editing this episode, and this listening back to this just brought me back to I'm sitting in the same apartment, the same house, where I live on the first floor. where all of this happened with my ex. And I am telling you, from as honest as I can be, is I want to put this behind me, and I want a normal life where I can start dating again and choose the right person to be a partner. And it's not that easy. It's not. Forget about the fact that it's the modern dating culture and the dating apps and all that stuff. It's getting past this trauma. And I didn't realize how deep it goes until I re-listened to this episode. While I recorded this episode a while ago, it didn't hit me then. It just hit me now as I listen back to it. So if anybody else out there is going through this, I am with you. Please feel free to reach out to me. And of course, if any of you are liking this podcast, I urge you to stop and give me 5 stars at the bottom of Apple. On Spotify, you can leave a review for each episode. Pass this along to a friend. And also, if anybody is looking for a social media producer, somebody who can put up promos or make nice reels and things like that on Instagram and TikTok, my social media producer is looking for more work. So contact me and I'll put you in touch with her. And as always, this episode is a perfect example of how I end every show. If you're going to commit to somebody, I can't stress this enough. Just listen to this episode, how much I'm still traumatized from 3 years ago. So choose wisely, people. I urge you just to choose wisely. Until next time, ciao.